All right, welcome back to another installment of the Wide Right Podcast. I'm Miami Hurricanes beat writer Manny Navarro, and if you've been in a coma or perhaps, just doing a lot of drugs or alcohol over the last few days and didn't see that Miami lost by 24 to Duke, my apologies. I've got to break the bad news to you. Miami is now 3-4. Carlos, did you watch the game?
Yeah, unfortunately I did. But and you know what? It's not just a situation that if you have done a lot of drugs leading up to the game and you missed it. I think many people have started using drugs following the game. And can you imagine, like, you're laying in a hospital bed for like 2 years and you went under right before the North Carolina game in 2020 when the Canes were rolling and you thought they'd have a chance to win the ACC, at least get to the championship game right before they got steamrolled by North Carolina, and then you're in a coma. You just woke up today and you're like, shit, the Canes were rolling. We're probably made the ACC championship game. We probably went back again. We're probably in position to do it this year. And then you wake up and you see Manny Diaz is gone. Why? He was doing a good job. But then you hear Mario Cristobal as the head coach. You're like, oh shit, we must be really rolling now. No, you're 3-4 and lost to Duke by like 45 points.
Yeah, not a good time to be a Hurricanes fan right now. But you know what? It's part of the transition period, right? When you're a first-year head coach, I think most Miami fans are upset that the Hurricanes don't have a better record right now. But there is probably a very small contingent that understand that this process with Mario is going to be painful. It's something that actually Andrew Pirelli and I talked about earlier today when I had him on the podcast. We did record that segment, about 25, 26 minutes long. Andrew, of course, from the South Florida Express, covers a lot of recruiting, knows a lot of the football players at Miami, has relationships with them from their 7-on-7 days. And, he has a good feeling for what's kind of happening with the team. And, we're going to play that interview here on the podcast if you're listening at home. That'll be played for you as part of an attachment. If you want to watch it on YouTube, it's on the Wide Right page. But Carlos, I mean, basically one thing Andrew talked about was really what's happening here is players are having a hard time adjusting to Mario. And the way I like to sort of compare the relationship is Manny Diaz was their friend, Mario Cristobal is their coach. And I think what's happening is, Mario's a hard ass, and there's some guys that just aren't necessarily built for the way he's going to run this program.
Listen, man, we all knew that this was going to take time to rebuild to be a contender. I thought it would be 9-3, 10-2 this year, just because I thought with the transition to Mario, the coaching staff they brought in, they could develop these guys and make them into something even better than they've been in the past. We saw how close games were last year. A field goal here, a missed drive here, and you go from 9-3 to 7-5 is basically what happened last year. You figured Mario would flip that with his coaching staff and the addition of some talent that he brought in, but it hasn't worked out that way. But I will say this. I'll give you an analogy. Mario's job here is kind of like what happened to me with my roof in my house, right? The roof on the outside of the house looked great. It was painted beautiful, barrel tile, everything looked good. Then that big-ass rainstorm that came for like 3 days in June came, and I got a leak in my roof. And I was like, oh, shit, I got to change the roof. So I sent a roofer out. He checked it out. He was like, okay, these spots are bad, whatever. You can get away with it for a couple more years just doing your flat roofs, but I was suggesting doing the whole thing. I'm like, you know what? You're right. Let's change it all out, and let's upgrade the roof to an aluminum one because that looks nice, and that's the shit against Hurricanes. Cool. My man gets started. What happens? He discovers more rot than he thought was there in places that we didn't expect rot to be. So he's got to put extra work in. The house looks uglier. Shit's all over the place. There's tar leaking on my front yard. There's fucking pieces of wood everywhere. There's a construction site that I did not anticipate in the front of my house. But you know what happened at the end? The shit looks beautiful. And this little hurricane that came by, I couldn't even hear the rain on my roof. That's how badass that roof is.
Wow.
It fixed the leak, made it better, but it took time. It looked ugly at first. We found more rot than was there initially. We had to get all that out, get all that rot out to make it right. But when it was right, it's really nice.
You've been using my rot theme quite a bit. I remember mentioning that a few weeks ago on the show, but you've now adopted it. You made it your own.
Listen, I've also heard a lot of people, I'm not going to mention names, using my mindset theme in other podcasts, but I'm going to let that shit slide too.
Any guilty?
No, but I mean, it's good to hear that other people think the same way I do without attributing credit to me, which is cool. But it's like this. It's truly about discovering which guys are here for the long haul and which aren't, and that's cool. And it's going to look ugly at first. And you're going to have to discover this on the fly because these guys do not have intimate knowledge of these players. They did not recruit these players. They did not interact with these players until they got him here on campus. Even the transfers, they have a very short relationship with. And I think that's part of the problem. To me, there are two major problems with what's gone on here with the conflict between the coaching staff and the players. Number one, the coaches came on board late, obviously, and they didn't understand who they had on the roster. And it took till the bullets were flying to really figure stuff out, because you can't figure the stuff out in scrimmages. Because if we got shitty guys going against shitty guys, well, one shit guy's going to look like shit in the other. Not a big deal. So the other problem is, I think I've said this before, I think a lot of these coaches come here with their ego high, saying, look at my resume, you know who I am, you got to do what I say if you want to be successful, and didn't take the time to build a relationship with the players, to grow that trust. They rolled in with the resume and say, hey, yo, you got to do what I say. As opposed to, listen, getting them to buy in early, letting them know what your vision is, building a personal connection with the kid, and then you can push them a little bit harder. But when you come in like a hammer to a nail right away, sometimes that rubs people the wrong way. And obviously, the ones that are weakest of mind, the ones that aren't ready for that stuff and aren't as committed, will start to fall away first. The ones that are sort of in between, that takes a little bit longer for them to fall off, but eventually they will too. All you're going to be left with is the ones that are really in it for real, for the long haul. But again, that takes a long time to discover, and there's going to be growing pains in between.
All excellent points. I wrote a story this morning off of what Mario said when he spoke with Joe Rose on his weekly appearance on WQAM, and basically Mario came out and I don't want to say he threw the players under the bus, but he basically said, look, you need to have a certain attitude to play here, right? And he made it pretty clear that some of these guys aren't going to be here going forward, right? There's guys that are having to, I don't know, prove themselves, and they're not doing it. They're not showing the coaches enough of what they want.
Yep.
And ultimately this program is suffering. They're struggling. And they're going through a lot of bad pains. Now, I will say this, there's a big contingent of the fan base, and I would say a whole lot of people on my timeline that are former Oregon fans or former Mario fans from Oregon. Let me word that correctly. They're still Oregon fans who say, look, Mario's a great recruiter, but he's a terrible coach. He's not a good game day coach. He's going to get the wrong coordinators in there. Look what Dan Lanning is doing with this team. They're ranked number 8 in the country now. They're 6-1. They rebounded from their 49-3 loss to Georgia with a really good performance last weekend, beating an undefeated UCLA team at home. Well, I did a little digging, and if you go to my story on The Athletic today, I wanted to look and see, well, how much of these guys were Mario guys? How many of these guys were Dan Lanning guys, right? Because it's easy for us to just say, oh, well, he's winning with Mario's team. Okay. Well, the quarterback, Bo Nix, came from Auburn. He's a transfer. The 2 leading rushers on the team came from Minnesota and Western Kentucky. The number 2 receiver on the team is from where did he come from? He came from another, I think UCLA, actually. He transferred from UCLA. And then you got your 2 starting defensive linemen, 2 of the 3 starting defensive linemen, because they play a 3-4 front, and their top cornerback all also transfer. So really, you got about 7 guys that Dan Lanning brought in that are really helping Oregon take off. They're averaging 11 more points a game than they were last year. And, the criticisms of Mario being a very unsexy offense, having a very unsexy offense and approach, I think that's true. We knew that, though, right? Coming in, that this is a guy who feels like he's not going to expose his defense. He's going to play a traditional, more ball control style. The problem is he just doesn't have the horses to do that. And so what's happened is he turned to Tyler Van Dyke to become that guy, throw the ball a bunch. It worked at Virginia Tech. And then last week, after the opening touchdown drive, they kind of just fell apart, and they couldn't run the ball. They couldn't really throw it. Jake Garcia had a couple big plays, but other than that, this offense has been a disaster. And so I guess saying all of those things, Carlos, what is your feeling as far as how scared Miami fans should be about Mario, the game day tactician, and the guy who hires the offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator?
Okay, as far as the game day tactician, the only thing you could put on Mario is anything that's having to do with clock management or 4th down situations, when you go for it, when you don't. The ones that create the game plans are the offensive and defense coordinators, okay? Although Mario has input on it, they clear it with Mario. They show them what they're thinking about. They show them what they want to do. But ultimately, it's their job to run the offense and the defense. So the whole Mario's a bad game day coach, unless you're talking about bad clock management, which we've seen some instances of that this year, but nothing too serious. and going for it on fourth downs, which I think he's been very aggressive this year. And I think the fans have liked that. They clamored for that last season with Manny Diaz. Now don't back up and say, oh, he's going for it too much on fourth down, because this is what your asses wanted last year, right? So to me, that's a little overstated. Two, as a head coach, your job is to employ the best staff possible and oversee that staff, to be a CEO coach. And that's what Mario basically does. He only really gets involved with the offensive line personally, okay, which right now is a disaster. But again, the old Gary Stevens quote, you can't make chicken salad out of chicken shit. Anyway, so the other thing of it is, when you hire a good staff, you don't necessarily have to be that great of a tactician, because they're handling that for you. And with this experienced staff, when it comes to clock management, when it comes to in-game situations, there's people that have been head coaches on the staff and are coached for great programs that can assist with that too. So it's not something that's all on Mario. Second, I would push back to those Oregon fans that say that he's terrible at hiring coordinators. Do you know who his coordinators were in 2019 when they won the Rose Bowl?
Tell me.
Marcus Arroyo and Andy Avalos. What do those two guys have in common? Did they get head coaching jobs?
Yeah.
Okay, so I guess they're pretty fucking good, right?
Yeah.
Okay. After that, who did he hire as his offensive coordinator? A little guy named Joe Moorhead?
Mm-hmm.
Is that guy kind of respected in college football as a great offensive line? I've heard him be really respected as an offensive line, right? So, I mean, and I forgot who his defensive coordinator was. I think it was Rittenauer. I forget it was. But it was the guy who was also respected in college football. Multiple guy. A really good coach, a really good tactician. So to me, Oregon fans crying in your milk saying that Mario hired shitty coordinators, don't give me that, bro. Don't give me that. Not when you celebrated two Pac-12 championship appearances, right? You celebrated two Rose Bowls. Don't give me all this shit now that Mario's gone, that he was terrible at this or he's terrible at that. Dan Lanning's a shit. Show me where Dan Lanning ends up at the end of the year. Then we'll talk.
Well, listen, there's no question that Mario brought some talented players in. But when you compare the NFL draft picks between Miami and Oregon since 2019, because Mario basically took over in 2018, just the last few drafts, Miami and Oregon ultimately have the same number of draft picks, 14 each. The difference is Oregon's got
what round are they going in?
Right. Oregon's got a few first rounders. Justin Herbert wasn't Mario's recruit. Kayvon Webster and Penei Sewell were. Look, I've always believed that the reason Mario will be successful here is because he's a very good talent evaluator, very good recruiter. If you look at the guys that are starting on that offensive line, which I think has given up 1 sack through 7 games, by the way.
Those are all his guys.
A lot of 3-star recruits, guys that they targeted that were coached up to perform and play better. And I know right now the current staff is reaping the benefits of that, but building an offensive line usually takes, 2 years. The guy gets redshirted his first year, puts on more weight, puts on good weight, whatever he has to do. And then he's got to learn how to play and play with speed. And so, in the good old days, at Alabama and places like that, guys don't start till they're redshirt sophomores. And maybe you get them 1 or 2 years, and then they go pro. Mario's inheriting a mess of an offensive line, really.
But honestly, this offensive line has been a mess for, I think, about 10 years. Yeah. And it's gotten worse, progressively worse over the years.
Well, and the one aspect I think fans keep forgetting about is, when you change coordinators, when you change offensive line coaches, when you change head coaches, you're teaching new guys are coming in and having to teach these guys their way of doing it, right? And so there's always that adjustment period. Look, I'm not trying to make excuses. They're 3-4. They shouldn't have lost to Duke. They shouldn't lose to Middle Tennessee State. I'll give you that. They should be a 5-2 football team right now. And it's disappointing that Mario has gotten off to the start. But I'm going to maintain that really what he was brought in here to do was to bring in talent. And I'm going to trust his evaluations over a lot of other guys who have done evaluations. And one thing you'll hear about when you do listen to my interview with Andrew Farelli is, Miami had some key recruits at the game on Saturday, including Francis Mauigoa, the 5-star offensive tackle from Miami Academy. And, it wasn't just with the websites that he spoke with. He spoke to a lot of different people and was like, look, I'm very in here. Like, I'm going to Miami. I want to be a part of this. I want to come play for Mario. And so that's an aspect that even if Miami were to struggle the rest of the season and not make a bowl game, okay, which, by the way, at this point, ESPN gives them a 38% chance of getting to 6 wins. So it's not expected anymore that they're going to even make a bowl game. I still think they're going to have a very good class here, and they're still going to kick ass in the transfer portal and find guys to bring in here. And so you got to almost give him a chance to really have at least 1 or 2 recruiting classes before I think you can fairly judge him.
And I would also say that the transition from Manny to Mario has almost been like the transition from Paul Johnson to Jeff Collins at Georgia Tech. Although it's not a systematic change as much, it's a cultural change. It's an upheaval from the way these guys have done things at Miami for so long, that it was so ingrained in this program, that this sudden change to this more hard-ass style, to more demanding style, to having a standard that's well above anything they've ever dealt with in their lives, has created friction between the staff and the players, and guys are wilting, and guys are not able to take it. And they are, when they get on the field, they're just not there. And in practices, they're not all there. And what you're having to put on the field is basically half a team, because half the guys are into it and half aren't. And the ones that aren't, you got to play them because you got nobody else, and they're being exposed.
Certainly, I think team morale isn't in a good place. Although I will tell you that, there are coaches that pull us to the side and say, hey, the kids are still trying hard. There's still effort. There's still a desire in this room. I know it didn't look like it in the fourth quarter. I think it's fair to question that against Duke in the fourth quarter, when Jake Garcia was throwing an interception and left and right and fumbles left and right, that it killed the morale. But we'll find out Saturday. The real film will be Saturday at 12:30 when they're playing in Charlottesville. Will they show up with any sort of heart? Will they show up and try to win that game? And Virginia, look, they're coming off a 16-9 win over Georgia Tech. Their quarterback, Brendan Armstrong, wants to prove to NFL teams that he's still a good quarterback. It's been a terrible season for them. He's got some good receivers still. So that game will be interesting. But I decided today on the drive over here to the Garrison, we're here at the Garrison in Miami Lakes doing our second straight show here. I hope that we worked out the audio.
I think the audio sounds a lot better for those of you guys complaining.
No, and it was very warranted. It was pretty bad audio. But what I will say is, you look at Miami going into that game. I've decided that I'm gonna be the person who starts lowering expectations at the University of Miami. And if you're listening to this episode today, you're gonna understand why for the rest of my career, as long as I'm doing this, as long as I'm working as a journalist and covering the Miami Hurricanes, I am never gonna pick them to win a game again. I'm not picking them to win a game again until they win a national championship. So you're wondering, why is Manny picking us to go 0-12? Why is Manny picking us to lose to Bethune-Cookman? You heard this episode, and if not, you're just gonna think I'm a hater. But from now on, I am not picking Miami to win a game.
Well, you are the kiss of death. You've been proven to be the kiss of death when you go to road games. So, I mean, thank you for this assistance. You are now swinging the mojo back in our favor.
Well, and I think expectations have to be lowered, right? I think we all came in with the wrong idea that generally that this team was going to win the division. I thought of, because they went 5-1 at the end of the season and they had Tyler back, that it would be easy. It clearly isn't.
Me too. But here's the thing. We also, a lot of the fan base, including me on occasion, our biggest expectations coming into the season each year aren't set by what's really on the roster. It's set by history. It's set by what we expect this team to try and climb their way back to. We're holding on to the past for 20 some odd years now, since that last national championship. And we're thinking that at one point it's just going to snap and be right back to what it used to be. But it's a climb, man. If you haven't realized it by now, this shit takes a while, and not everybody gets it right. And, sometimes you got to just rip out the whole thing and start over again. And if it takes this team going 4-8 this season to bounce back and get back to the program that it should be, contending for national championships year after year, if it's a slow climb, I'll take it. I'll take a 4-8 season, then a 7-5, then a 9-3 to get to 11-1, 12-0, and be in that playoff spot. But create a foundation for success throughout time, consistent success. Not build it for a flash in the pan like 2017. Build it for something that you can have consistently year in, year out, a contender for a playoff spot or a national championship. If it takes going through these growing pains, I'll do it. I'll take it. And I think as Canes fans, we have to reset our expectations and deal with what's in front of us right now. Right now, I will accept that the coaching staff and the players both deserve blame. But also at the same time, let's have a little thought experiment. If you buy an old car, right, that you want to remodel and fix up and stuff, but it has a really good running engine, you're like, okay, at least I got the engine down. But you're driving it down the street and it's all rusted and broken. Do you expect that car to perform the same way as a brand new car? No. Even though the engine's great, the rest of the car sucks. So you've got to build up that car until it's ready to be replicated or at least remodeled into the point where it looks like and functions like a car of that brand new car of that model, right? So until you do that, until you go through the remodeling process, and again, some people are saying, why is TCU playing so well with the first-year head coach? Why is, other schools that have first-year head coaches, why is Mike Elko out coaching Mario Cristobal first year? Why is this happening? Well, there's changes that need to occur. Some programs are in better positions than others. Some programs have very little expectations and have guys that are willing to do whatever it takes to win because they've never tasted it before. Whereas other programs, like ours, have guys that are entitled and think they deserve to win just because they came from South Florida and have that U in their helmet, and it doesn't work that way. And that's what Mario's trying to instill in this program again. It needs to be earned. It all has to be earned. Nothing is given to you. And when you show up on Saturday and you can roll the ball out, and when you score a touchdown, you get up 21-17, and you think, okay, that's it, we crushed their spirit because we're the U. No, people are going to fight back and counterpunch and hit you in the mouth, and you've got to be able to react to that and stomp their feet, stop them. And I said coming into this game, into my preview, I felt like this team has yet to prove in the last 2-3 years that they can come back from a deficit. They're great at front running, but they can't come back and win a game late after being down early, overcome adversity. When this team hits adversity, yeah, they fight, they try to get back into the game, but they're never there. They never cross that threshold. They never get over that hump. And that's something that's mental more than physical. And I don't think they're there yet. There has to be a game. Let's say if this game against Virginia, they get down 24-10 or 24-7 in the third quarter. If they find a way to fight back and win that game, that could be the thing that triggers and makes the change happen. But they're going to have to prove it on the field one way or another. Front running and beat them, we're up 21-0 at the half, all that's easy. When you have to come back, when you have to look inside yourself and look at your teammates and say, okay, are we going to do this for each other or not? And I think that's something else that's missing. We've talked about this team missing leadership for years. I don't know if these guys care about each other enough to do what they need to do to make it happen on the field, or if they're out there just looking for their own numbers.
One thing I want to add before we get to the mailbag and start answering some of the questions that were sent to us here within the last 24 hours. One interesting conversation I had today with somebody on the staff was part of the problem that they have is hero ball, essentially, where guys are going to break out of gaps or break out of responsibilities because they feel like, well, I got to go make the play. I got to go save my teammates. And that's what ends up causing a lot of the mishaps and breakdowns, particularly on defense. When you see the big plays, it's one guy, like Manny Diaz used to say, right? One guy out of the assignment. So I think there are obviously guys that care. I think the problem is what these guys don't do is trust each other. And that's only built through success. That's only built through leadership and a common understanding that you're getting to a good place. So, yeah. And so, I to me, that's part of what Miami has to go through as a program with Mario, is getting to the point where everybody's on the same page. And I know fans are upset, but it's like I got a phone call from my former editor, Walter Villa, the other day, and he says to me, oh, Mario's a worse coach than Manny Diaz, And he says, how can he be doing worse with this team? And I said, you mean all those first-round picks that he inherited from Manny Diaz? All those All-Americans? You mean those guys aren't playing up to snuff? You mean the guys that started 2-4 last year are letting Mario down? I'm shocked. I'm surprised. I think the fan base has to realize just because they were 7-5 last year and beat Duke 47-10 in the last game, that's not what the ultimate goal is here. The ultimate goal is to get to much higher place. And so I think, like you said earlier, if you have to go through a 4-8 season, if you have to go through something to rip the Band-Aid off, so to speak, then you're probably doing the right thing to get to where you want to go.
Yeah, because for too long, like you said, they placed a Band-Aid on this program and just thought about winning now and making it look good enough to continue coaching at the program and continue being mid-tier. Whereas to really get to be elite, you have to start all over again. You have to rip it all out and start from the bottom and grow it up.
All right, I want to get to some mailbag questions here that we requested. And some of these are hot takes. Some of these are questions. So I apologize if when I start reading this, it doesn't come out exactly perfectly clean or whatever. I'm going to try to go back as far as I can. All right, this is from Tyler Overly on Twitter. Where do we go from here? The fan base cannot see us ever digging out of this hole. Mediocrity is the norm. I think, all right, this is a good question, Carlos, a good topic to get into. When should Miami fans start to expect a turnaround here?
Okay, when you say turnaround, what are you talking about? Are you talking about competing for a playoff spot, or are you talking about competing for the ACC championship?
let's go with it simple. Let's go with the Al Golden goal. Let's talk about winning the Coastal and getting to
Well,
the
they're never going to win the Coastal
right. Well, so getting to the ACC championship game. They're never going to win the Coastal. So getting
because
to the
the Coastal's gone after this season.
right.
I would say, give it 2 more years. I don't think next year they're going to do it. I think year 3 is when they should be a competitor for the ACC title game, because it's going to take not just this recruiting class that you just got, the one that's coming up now, and the one after that. You want to have 3 classes in, so you have depth, and also be able to add guys in the transfer portal throughout that time to fill in the holes within the roster. And there, as we've seen, there's a lot of holes. So I would say year 3 they should be competing. I won't say they'd win it, but I'd say they'll be in that game and competing for the championship.
Yeah, I think you could do it as early as next year if you attack the transfer portal as hard as I think they're going to do. Michigan State had a great turnaround season a couple years ago with the transfer portal having a lot of success there. I think with Alonzo Highsmith here and some of the hires that they've made in terms of evaluation, that you could flip this roster pretty quickly. Now, I will say this: there are areas where they're going to have to clearly address, running back being one of them,
Yep.
offensive line being another, and then probably defensive line, because a lot of the guys that are here now that they pulled in this last cycle, the
They're
Jake,
going to be one and done.
they're all going to be one and done. So you're going to have to readdress that position once again, and offensive linemen, finding offensive linemen is probably the toughest thing to do in the transfer portal.
Yeah.
There's not many. I was going to sit there and research how many offensive linemen, switched schools last year and are starters, because I just don't think the number is that high. I think it's pretty low. And in fact, you look at some of the teams that have offensive linemen, coming in as true freshmen. LSU has 2 true freshmen starting on their offensive line. Clemson has their starting right tackle, the true freshman. So getting a guy like Francis Mauigoa, and he could come in and be one of those kind of guys who makes an instant impact, but you still got to fix the inside of the offensive line for Miami.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, listen, it's part of the issue with the offensive line this year is you had a guy who was supposed to start at left tackle, who was supposed to be a projected first-round pick, who has not been on the field all season, basically. You've had to bring in John Campbell, who's done an okay job at left tackle, but really should be the starting right tackle. Then you've got DJ Scaife, who's playing right tackle, who should really be the right guard, right? Because that's his best position. Then your center's been hurt the last couple games. He's not 100%. And, Jalen Rivers has been okay, but he hasn't been spectacular. So to me, that's been the issue. The injuries along the offensive line. You also lost Justice Olushun down to injury, who was effective. Wasn't great, but he was effective. And the guys that rolled in behind him haven't been good. So it's an issue when you don't have depth on the offensive line and you're shuffling guys in and out. Now, if you had a team that you were 10 deep on the offensive line, 12 deep, then you'd be okay because you could roll guys in and out. You wouldn't have an issue. But this team isn't built like that just yet. And that affects everything. People don't understand how critical, and which is why Mario is addressing it, the offense and defensive lines are to an offense and a defense, especially on an offense. Because if you can't block, it doesn't matter what you draw up. You can draw up the greatest play in the world. If you cannot block, you're not executing that play. So it doesn't matter. There could have been plays where Jake Garcia, when he got knocked on his ass and he fumbled, maybe somebody was wide open and he was about to hit somebody for a touchdown. But we couldn't block it, so it doesn't matter. So all those things factor in. And I think building from the lines out is the way to go. And it's going to take time because those are the hardest positions to fill and to be most effective. Now, if you get a guy like Francis Mauigoa to be a day one starter, then you're lucky. But usually it takes 2 or 3 years to build a grown man on the offensive line.
All right, this is from Ruben Velorio. Are players put off by Cristobal's personality? They think he is being fake and therefore not buying in, or have they just had enough coaches that they don't really think about anything, or they don't think anything will make a difference? Do they just have a losing mentality? I mean, I think we kind of touched on this question, Ruben, but just to, whether or not they're put off by his personality. Yeah, I mean, I think Mario, look, Mario's 53 years old. Okay.
He's a grown ass man, dog.
He's a grown ass man, and he's from a different era where you weren't guys' best friend, right? I mean, he learned under Nick Saban. His approach is be a hard ass and be the coach, not somebody's friend. And it's a stark difference from Manny Diaz.
Yeah.
And I just think guys are having trouble adjusting to it.
And the last thing I think you could ever say about Mario Cristobal is that he's fake. He's authentic. What you see is what you get. That's who that dude is. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. That shit you see during press conferences, that's him. That's not a fake persona.
Did you see a scowl, by the way, he gave me in the post-game interview for suggesting they might have quit?
I watched it after you told me about it, and I felt for you, bro. That dude was like, that was Bam! That was a death stare. No wonder you were pounding beers later at my house that night. You were like, bro, I don't know what happened. You had that 1,000-yard Vietnam stare. I don't know what was going on.
All right, this is from Matt Reed News. Other than firing the offensive coordinator, what potential moves would you like to see Mario make in the offseason? Good question,
People
Matt.
love firing offensive coordinators. I think that is the
Oh, and defensive coordinators.
yeah, but I think they prefer firing offensive coordinators more. I don't know why. I think they just enjoy it more. But listen, I don't see Josh Gaddis being here long term, just because I think he's got his eyes set on a head coaching job, which is why he left Michigan to begin with, because he felt he was disrespected there and should have been considered for the job if Harbaugh took the Vikings job. And I also think at this point he's like, this is tarnishing my brand a little bit being here. So he's going to try and find the first exit out, either to jump to another school as an offense coordinator or to try and get a head coaching job somewhere just get away from here. I don't think he's going to be here next year. Kevin Steele, I think he's a little long in the tooth for this. And I think grinding with Mario has worn on him a little bit. And I think he's probably going to exit also. He ain't down for this shit no more. This is way too much work for him. The good news is I think they have guys in place that could be elevated to take over those jobs. So obviously Charlie Strong could take over the defense if he wanted to, unless he wants to make a move somewhere else. Adai could take over the defense. He's an up and coming guy, young guy, lots of energy, really good defensive mind. And offensively, you got Frank Ponce there. So I think there's opportunities to elevate guys to keep some consistency, but also at the same time maybe put a different spin on things.
Yeah, I think there's going to be changes no matter what. I think, like you said, a lot of these guys could potentially get jobs somewhere else, head jobs or coordinator jobs elsewhere. And Mario, that's why he spends so much time interviewing guys, because he doesn't just interview them for the current job. He interviews them for 2 years down the road or 3 years down the road. We'll have to see what kind of way that disrupts the growth that they're making. But I think, one thing I'd like to see with this offense, besides better offensive linemen to run what you want to run, I think playing with pace is ultimately what a lot of kids want to do. And I don't know that you can do it all the time, because it does wear on your defense. It does put your defense in bad situations. If you don't have a good defense, you can't play fast all the time. But I do think that today's kids, it's just a way to attract them, to make them want to come be a part of it, especially playmakers. They want to be in wide open offenses. And I think playing this traditional style that they do, or they try to play, I think that's more reserved for when you have the lead. When you're up 2 scores in the third or fourth quarter, go ahead and play that style. But I think when you're in a dogfight, when you're early in the game and it's 7-7 or 10-10, whatever the score is, and you're fighting, put the defense in their worst possible position. Make them have to substitute. Make them have to be gassed. That's one thing I think has to be a part of this offense moving forward.
Well, I think when it comes to pace, to me, I'm not a guy that favors fast pace all the time, and I'll tell you why. Because it limits your play call set. It limits your formation set. It limits your motions and your shifts. Because when you're going that fast, you can't really get motions and shifts and get different kinds of play calls. And that's why you see a lot of teams that go so fast, they basically run 2 plays. They'll run inside zone and they'll be outside zone read. That's all they run when it comes to the run game. And then they'll have quick passing games off that. They may adjust formationally. They'll do that kind of stuff. But you'll barely see any motions and shifts because that takes too much time to call on the line of scrimmage. You're usually getting a one-word call on the line, and that's your play and go, right? And then sometimes you'll check back for a secondary play and do that kind of stuff if you really want to try and catch a defense with something special that you have. The guy that really started to promote pace in college football was Rich Rodriguez, right? And even Rich Rodriguez had 3 pace settings that he would go to within a game. He would have 3 colored wristbands, and depending on the wristband that he touched, this is what we're going to go with. As fast as was NASCAR, and I forget what the other 2 were. One was like a medium pace, and the other was like, all right, this one we're going to take our time. We're going to be more deliberate. And I think shifting pace puts the defense more on its heels than just constantly going fast. Because you want to be able to get certain play calls in and get certain matchups in that maybe going too fast you're not going to get, and get those substitutions in. I think ultimately, to me, what I like as an offense is if you could be as multiple as possible, you could stress a defense in a way that's unordinary. Because if you could be a team, like you said, that can line up in a tight 2 tight end set and hammer down and run gap schemes and pin and pull, but at the same time they come back next series and spread it 5 wide and go with pace and run bubbles and run RPO and run all this kind of stuff that you normally see in a fast-paced zone-based offense, that stresses the defense because now they have to essentially prepare for 2 offenses. So if you have the personnel to be able to do both, that's to me is something you could take advantage of. And I think Miami's building towards that because we've always got really good tight ends. You've got a stable tight ends to do that kind of stuff, who are not only blockers, but also really good pass catchers. So that helps. And I think ultimately, once they get the offensive line in place, you can be multiple in that way and play at different paces and play with different styles.
All right. I hope that answers your question. Let's move on to Daniel. Dan TOW3386. As much as the current situation seems dire, we all need to take a step back and wait to see what happens when Mario has a couple years to recruit, right? The O-line push probably improves with guys like Mauigoa and Kinsler, does it not? Seems like the expectations for this year were too high. Manny Diaz doesn't fare much better given that the transfers we have wouldn't necessarily be here. Nigel Cyrus, Jaleel, Citizen, none of them would be here. This is just a continuation of the Diaz era, in my opinion. I think it's a good take. I think that's one thing that people sort of maybe take for granted is, had Manny Diaz stayed here, what would their transfer portal haul have looked like? They didn't really have any recruiters, any receivers, in the recruiting class outside of Isaiah Horton. Obviously, they would have gone out and tried to find guys as well. But, you would have had a change in offensive coordinator. Rhett Lashley was going to be the coach at SMU anyway. I think it's an interesting what if Manny was still here question.
Right. And I think, he named the guys like Citizen and Nigel Leak and Cyrus, but those guys aren't playing. Well, Nigel Leak is playing a little bit, right, but it's not like he's making a big impact, is what I'm saying. So he would have still gotten the same because the same committed before Manny got fired. And I think who knows what he got on the transfer portal. He didn't do a bad job in the transfer portal either. He might have filled different spots, different holes. Maybe Nate, Nessa Silvera stays, so you've got another guy along the defensive line, another experienced guy. But, to me, it would have been a situation where you probably might have had better results in terms of wins and losses because you would have kept the core of the team together. You would have stayed with the same kind of system maybe and added a piece here or there. But for the long-term future of the program, that would have been sort of the top end. I don't think you would have been better than 9-3, 8-4, and consistently with Manny Diaz. What we're doing, like we talked about now, is we're ripping this thing apart to get to 12-0 one day. If you want to be 12-0, you got to rip out the whole thing, gut it, and start from nothing.
All right. This is from Corey Lowe. I think it's more of a statement than it is a question. How is it possible with this so-called great coaching staff that we've regressed to this embarrassing level? Well, because obviously this is deeper than just the coaching. If it was simply play calling, that would be pretty evident. But you don't turn the ball over 8 times because the wrong plays are being called. You don't have 17 penalties because the wrong plays are being called. You could sit here and pick apart a lot of these losses. You don't, give up 7, whatever it was, 6 pass plays of over 40 yards to Middle Tennessee State because the wrong play was called. You do that because guys have bad habits and they don't do their job the way that they should.
Yeah, Josh Gaddison's not standing up in the booth or calling down, hey, let's throw the interception play now. Let's throw the Jalen Knighton fumble out there. Let's run those plays. That'll work. Right? Let's run the Jake Garcia get blindsided and fumble play. That's not what they're calling. It's execution. But ultimately, it also lies on the coaching staff to some extent because you've got to, and I think this is where the issue of the ego came in a little bit is you've got to be able to connect with these kids and get them to do what you want them to do somehow and maybe relent a little bit, although you don't change your standard, but you change your approach. In teaching, my wife is a teacher, you have something called differentiated instruction. People learn different ways. And if you're teaching the same thing the same way and getting the same results, and these kids aren't getting it, then it's your fault. You need to change the way you approach and understand you have different learners and what triggers a guy to understand the scheme, right? And how he learns best and what motivates that person individually. Some guys like it when you get in their face. And say, hey, listen, you got to get shit together. Other guys you need to talk to. Other guys you just got to rationalize with them. Say, listen, this is what you need to do. This is where you went wrong. Can you fix it? It's like, all right, I got it. No problem. So a one-size-fits-all approach does not work. And I think that's something that needs to be adjusted. As far as play calling stuff is concerned, I will say this. I think they've been a little bit stubborn in some areas. Particularly when it comes to the offensive side of the football. Their red zone play calling has been atrocious this year. If it wasn't for Colby Young developing over the last couple of weeks, they probably wouldn't score in the red zone, or at least not touchdowns. And I think this game, when Josh Gaddis saw that Duke decided they were just going to blitz pretty much 2 out of 3 downs and play zone behinding, he had to come up with a scheme to adjust to that, and he never did. So you do, to me, a couple of things. Number one, how many times did you see them go 5 wide, empty backfield this game?
A bit.
But not enough to me, because that helps you identify the blitz.
Right.
And now you got to go quick off of that. Not as often as they did the last few games,
Right.
which helped. The other thing is, how many times did we see them go max protection with a 3-man route? Hardly any. Okay, so that's another issue to me. When you have a team zone blitzing you, and you don't know where it's coming from, the best thing to do, or one of the things to do, is max protect, flood a zone with different levels, so that way you're protected and you can identify the gap in the zone. And he didn't do enough of that either. So there are things he could have done to adjust that he didn't do. Now, also at the same time, there are failures along the offensive line where linemen weren't stepping in the right direction, they weren't covering the right gap, and the running backs are terrible at blitz pickup on this team. And that's been an issue all season long as well. So that's hindered the offense. Defensively, they just missed a shitload of tackles. They were out of position. And when the fourth quarter rolled around, after all the turnovers, they're like, screw this, I just want to go home.
It was ugly. All right, this is from Justin Canada Canes on Twitter. Without naming names, what would you bet the over/under on current players hitting the portal if it was set to 6.5? I would say the over.
I'd say over.
I would say, and J.K. Slade chimed in responding to Canada Kane saying definitely take the over. I would guess a minimum of 15 players. This is a conversation that I actually had earlier today with Andrew Ferrelli of South Florida Express, and I could see 40 guys off this roster from last year, and some of it are guys that are just running out of eligibility or going to be graduate transfers, guys that weren't playing or whatever. But I also think there's going to be a good amount of young players that leave as well.
Yeah.
All right. This is from Mark Ardois, 521 on Twitter. Mario pushed this mentally soft team hard and they broke. It stinks and it hurts. But now we will know what we really have. He could have pulled the Band-Aid off slowly with less pain, but he has ripped it off, causing a lot more pain now. But we'll be able to get better a lot quicker. Apparently, your name is Mark Ardois on Twitter.
Oh, is it? I like it. It's my French alter ego.
Yes. Same take as you. Exactly the same take. J.K. Slay says, I'm still all in on Mario, but this looks like the worst Miami team in the last 15 years, including the 8-5 Golden team that lost 58-0 to Clemson. Am I wrong? What team performed worse than this one?
I think that also the last 15, the 07 team that lost 48-0 to Virginia in the Orange Bowl. I think that team was worse. Weren't they 5-7?
Yeah, there were a couple teams that only won 5 games here or 6 games.
Yeah, that was. But that particular team in 07 was pretty bad.
Yeah. I would say it's probably on that level with those guys. All right, let's keep rolling here, and then we're gonna wrap this up and get to my interview with Andrew Ferrelli. This is from JK Slime Hennessy. Realistically, how much do you attribute the fumbles as player problems, coaching problems, and luck?
When a guy keeps doing it consistently, it's a player problem. So when Jalen Knighton keeps fumbling on soft tackles, that's a Jalen Knighton problem. Do you think the coaches are coaching him to fumble the ball in games? Do you think they're not going through ball security drills with him? It's just a guy problem. It's his problem. Now he's got a mental block for some reason. He can't hang on to the football. So that kind of stuff is a player problem. Sometimes it's luck as well. Sometimes you get a well-placed helmet on the football on a kickoff, and then it's done. But they're not. I guarantee you, these coaches are going over ball security. They are teaching them how to run the football. They're teaching them how to secure the football. They are not teaching or coaching them how to fumble. I can guarantee you that.
Just for the record, I did ask Josh Gaddis the question during the press conference today. And for those of you that didn't watch it or didn't see it, I know a lot of you have tuned out for the entire season. Basically, his response to me was, he's running with his dominant hand and he's not protecting the football.
I always taught it this way also as well when I learned at a coach's clinic. It says you have to have wrist over elbow when you're running the football. Wrist over elbow, tuck it tight to the body. That way it's hard to punch out and you secure it against your chest. If you run it this way with your elbow out, there's a chance to pop it out with a punch or pop it out with a helmet. When you go wrist over elbow, tight to your chest, even a helmet is going to drive it back into your chest.
All right. Who's more to blame for this failed season, the players or the coaches? What does Mario have to do in the offseason to change his team? This is from Andrew V_17. Who's most to blame? They're all to blame. I'm not going to sit here and just say it's the players. A lot of these guys were recruited here under a different staff. It's not their fault. They're here. I will say, there were a lot of conversations that I've had over the years, and you and I have had these conversations. Why are they taking this kid? Why is he here? He's not a Hurricane. And I think unfortunately this is just year one. Hopefully for Mario, there's no recruiting mistakes.
And guys, those of you that are upset with Mario and want him fired, he ain't going nowhere. You know how much that buyout's going to be? Even if a team like Auburn wants to try and pluck him out of here, and Mario says, I'm not up for this shit anymore. This is too much work. They thought I was Captain Save-A-Hole, and I came down here to save this program, and now they want me out? Fine, I'm going to Auburn. It's going to cost way too much money to buy Mario out of this contract. He's here for the long haul, and I doubt that Mario would want to leave here until he's built this thing back up. This thing means that much to him. So I think eventually it's going to get to where we want it to go. But right now, you got to deal with the growing pains, man. Like my man Kirk Cameron.
All right.
This is Coke, by the way. This is Diet Coke. I have to have my traditional Diet Coke during the podcast. Do not think that I am slamming like rum and cokes or dark beer here. I am being responsible, although I'm in a bar.
I am having, what's the name of this beer again? This is the Garrison.
The Garrison Lager.
The Garrison Lager. So there's your plug.
That's their home brew here. That's their own specialty exclusive brew. Over 80 beers on tap. They've got stuff every night of the week here. Tuesday night is ladies' night. Wednesday night is salsa night. Thursday night is trivia. Friday night is karaoke, which I came to last week. Did not sing, but had a good time. Saturday night is a dance party, and Sunday is NFL games all day long.
Garrison Tap Room here in Miami Lakes. You can find the address online and or check out the tweets. We've sent some flyers out before for them. All right, this is from G Fernie. He says, longtime listener and athletic subscriber. Manny, you mentioned the team isn't talented as it shows on paper, though I have to wonder how much talent does Miami need to beat teams like Middle Tennessee State and Duke. I'm not asking what we need to be conference or national champs or to even beat North Carolina. It seems like it's more that Mario and some coaches are getting out-coached on scheme plays and how they're coaching players that we can beat with subpar talent. We have, which I believe is still better than Middle Tennessee State and Duke. So in other words, he's basically wondering why is it that they're losing to teams with less talent.
Okay, my man, what's his name?
Fernie,
my dude. I like you. I like your name, Fernie, because I had a bunch of boys back in the day named Fernie. All right, that I grew up with. Have you watched the last 15 years of Hurricane football? How many times have we lost to teams that they were more talented than? It's par for the course, bro. I get it. Middle Tennessee, Duke, I get it. This is not your mother's Duke team, my man. This Duke team's pretty good. So if you were going to beat them, you needed to be on point with everything you were doing. And 8 turnovers, I don't care who you're playing. You could have had 8 turnovers against Bethune, and you probably would have lost that game. Okay? The other thing, Middle Tennessee, I agree. Same thing, but again, turnovers and blown coverages. Just because we're saying that the talent on this team isn't as good as everybody thinks, doesn't mean we're saying it's not good enough to beat a team like Duke and Middle Tennessee. At the end of the day, it comes down to effort, mindset, and execution. And if your dudes aren't all in, if guys aren't giving full effort, if guys aren't locked in mentally, these are the kind of results that you get. And we've seen this for 15 to 20 years. The difference is now Mario refuses to relent, and he's going to beat these guys into submission to either get to the standard that he wants, or he's going to sit their ass on the bench and make them suffer through a 4-8 season to prove a point.
All right. We got a bunch more questions, but we're not going to get to all of them. A lot of them are kind of repeating a lot of the same themes. So I apologize for those of you that sent questions in. Just, we're kind of hitting the same subject over and over again. I don't want to kill the momentum here. This is from Mitch, Maniac Kane Mitch on Twitter. What's your definition of leadership? He's got two questions and a comment. That's the first question. The second one is, why aren't we seeing it from certain players or coaches? Coach Cristobal seems like a great leader. So does the defensive coordinator, but there are a lot of questions as far as the offensive coordinator. Michigan doesn't look like they're missing their Broyles Award winner. All right, here's what I will say about Josh Gaddis, okay? I don't know if you were paying attention to social media this weekend, but I included this in my story. But the mother for Keyshawn Smith went on Twitter and basically said that Gaddis went into the offensive room and said, you guys are the worst offense that I've ever had here. Now, again, that's nothing that, any of us can confirm. We're going off of his mom's tweet, but, look, he doesn't have to really say that to them because I think it's obvious. This is probably the worst offense he's ever coached. As far as leadership and why we're not seeing it from certain players or coaches, I just think there's certain guys that aren't those guys. There's alpha males is kind of the toughest thing to be able to really locate. Guys today are such more worried about friendship and not getting their boys angry than maybe putting them in their place or telling them, hey, this is what we need to do to win. So I just think that's what they're lacking. And to me, that's what leadership is. Leadership is being able to elevate your team and the people around you to a level that they can. And that's either through example on the field, in terms of, you know, doing it yourself, or it's through speaking it and getting them to follow you. And I just there's not enough of those on the team in terms of the players, and you need that to win.
Yeah, and I think, like you said, the leadership comes in many forms. One could be leading by example, not necessarily being the rah vocal guy, but just doing what the coaches ask every day and setting the standard and setting the bar and showing what you do on and off the field to be 100% full of effort and in line with what the coaching staff wants. And the other thing is to be able to do that on and off the field as well, but also be a vocal guy that gets guys in line. That's not afraid to hurt feelings. That's not afraid to get up in people's faces to get done what you need to get done. I mean, that's what the 2001 team, if you saw the U Part 2 documentary, that's all they talked about. They talked about, being self-accountable, that those teams ran themselves. They didn't need the coaches to tell them what to do. They did it on their own because they all policed themselves. And guys that fell out of line, they had to come in the locker room and get within that U-shaped couch and have to square off against leaders on the team. Because if you're not getting your job done, you're going to pay consequences.
All right, we're going to get to Andrew Ferrelli here in a minute. Make sure you stick around for that interview if you're listening to us on the podcast. All right, if Manny was the defensive coordinator, Carlos the offensive coordinator, Ferrelli was in charge of the roster, and Raul was heading up strength and conditioning, what changes would you all make for the remaining games of next season? Not calling players out, just general thoughts at a higher level. This is from Michael Abreu. What would happen if Raul was the strength and conditioning coach?
I think everybody would be severely overweight, hungover, and probably cramping up on game day because they went out to drink the night before. I don't think you want that. I don't think you want Raul as the strength and conditioning guy.
Yeah, that would be when you have a lot of guys out. I mean, with all the alcohol they'd be drinking, that he'd have a lot of hamstrings.
Yeah, and I'll tell you what, Vicky Bakery would probably have to be a sponsor of the team because that's what he'd feed them every day, and that's not good for the waistline. I can attest to that myself.
All right. This is from Marcus Williams, Money Kane. Who are the guys we can't afford to lose in this next class? And how many do you see us losing if the team finishes out the season winless with a 3-9 record? I would say most of the offensive linemen are guys that you have to have. I would say Nathaniel Joseph is somebody you need to have. He's a leader at the wide receiver position. He's a guy who essentially will come in and replace Rashard Smith once Rashard Smith is gone in the slot, as well as Xavier Restrepo. Yeah. Beyond that, I don't know enough of the recruiting class intimately to know what their DNA is. I will say this, because Mario is recruiting them, I feel better about them than the last couple of classes. All right, it's 8:30, Carlos. I want to get to this Ferrelli interview. We've been here an hour. A lot of comments. Again, I apologize to everybody whose questions we were unable to get to or whose comments we weren't able to get to. But Carlos, thanks for doing the show with me. Thank you to the Garrison for allowing us here. Make sure that you stick around and you listen to the Andrew Ferrelli interview. It's only 26 minutes. A lot of good insight from him. A couple quick things I wanted to share. As I was walking out of Miami today, getting in my car and leaving, I saw quarterback Tyler Van Dyke with his right arm in a sling as he walked out of the building. Mario not giving us any update as far as how long Tyler might be out or if he'll be out at all. He said he called it soreness. He didn't look like a guy that was going to be playing to me this week.
Yeah, it looks to me like it's at least a sprained AC joint or maybe a shoulder separation. Who knows?
We will see what ultimately we learn. But Jake Garcia is preparing to be the starting quarterback at Virginia this week. I saw Zion Nelson as well as I was leaving, and big brace on his knee, crutches. Looked like a guy who probably had surgery again. So my guess is we will not see Zion the rest of the year. Mario was asked about him in the press conference afterward. Said simply that they have to put him on ice, and we'll see when he get him back. So that sounds to me again like somebody who's probably done for the season. Yep. James Williams was injured, didn't finish the game last week. I know there's some fans that are upset with his tackling. But Mario made it seem today, I didn't see James Williams, so I don't know what his injury is. But Mario made it seem like he is okay. There's not a season-ending type injury, but again, we'll have to see with our own eyes what happens to James Williams.
Yeah, I think it was like a lower extremity injury to James Williams.
Right. So those are the big ones. Rashard Smith will be back this coming week. He had a good game at Virginia Tech, so that'll help the receivers. Outside of that, that's what I've got for you. Carlos, any final thoughts as we get to this Andrew Ferrelli interview?
No, man. Let's just I know it's hard. It's been a rough season. I know that a lot of you guys are upset. You've jumped off the ship. A lot of you guys have claimed that you're never going to watch this team again the rest of the season, or until they show you that they're going to start winning on a consistent basis. Guys, we only get 12 of these a year. Okay, you spend your whole off season focusing on the recruiting classes, debating about whether or not they're going to go back to Nike, and all the stupid shit you talk about in the off season because you want this team to come back. Enjoy the time you have. Wins or losses. I'm suffering too, but you only get 12 of these, and hopefully 13 if they make a bowl game. So enjoy it while you can, man. Don't let college football ruin your mood on a weekend also. If they lose, they lose. You're a little upset at the end of the game and you move on, buddy. Don't let this ruin your weekend. Find hobbies, find other things to do. Okay? Enjoy yourselves. Go Canes.
All right, we will be back with another Wide Right next week, but make sure you tune in and listen to Andrew Ferrelli, the South Florida Express, talk a little recruiting with me.